A quiet Florida neighborhood was shattered when a gunshot echoed through the night. A husband claimed betrayal so deep it pushed him beyond reason. But what secret could destroy 7 years of marriage and end in blood? This isn't just another domestic tragedy. This is the story of Michael Thompson, a 34-year-old construction worker who thought he knew everything about his wife Sarah. 7 years of shared breakfasts, joint bank accounts, and whispered promises in the dark. 7 years of what seemed like perfect suburban bliss. Until one October evening when police found Sarah bleeding out on their kitchen floor and Michael standing over her with a smoking gun in his trembling hands. Stay with me, because this case has twists that will make you question everything you think you know about love, trust, and the deadly power of secrets. Who was the woman Michael married? A devoted wife who volunteered at the local animal shelter, who made homemade cookies for their neighbors every Christmas, who cried during romantic movies, or was she someone else entirely, living a carefully constructed lie that would cost her everything? Why did the truth take 7 years to surface? What kind of secret runs so deep that it can stay buried through mortgages, anniversaries, and countless intimate moments? And here's the question that will haunt you. Did betrayal alone drive Michael to murder, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage? Welcome to Silent Witness, True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. The story began like something out of a movie. It was 2016, and Michael Thompson was rebuilding his life after a messy divorce. He'd sworn off dating, focusing instead on his construction business and weekend fishing trips. That's when he met Sarah Martinez at a church barbecue in Clearwater, Florida. She was helping serve food to the homeless, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, laughing with the elderly volunteers. Michael later told friends it was her kindness that drew him in first, then her easy smile, and the way she listened when he talked about his dreams of expanding his business. Sarah seemed perfect for a man ready to settle down. She was 28, worked as a medical receptionist, and had this way of making everyone around her feel special. She'd bring coffee to Michael's work sites, surprise him with his favorite dinner after long days, and never complained when he tracked mud through their apartment. Their friends called them soulmates, but looking back, those same friends would remember small things that seemed odd. Sarah never talked about her childhood in detail. When pressed about family, she'd change the subject or give vague answers about growing up in foster care. She had no baby pictures, no yearbook photos, no college friends who visited. Her past seemed to begin the day she turned 18. Michael's best friend David later admitted he'd found it strange. She was like this perfect girlfriend who just appeared out of nowhere, he'd tell police. But Mike was so happy, and she seemed to genuinely love him, so we all just went with it. The couple moved in together after 6 months, got engaged after 2 years, and married in a small ceremony at the same church where they'd met. Sarah had no family in attendance, explaining that her foster parents had passed away and she'd lost touch with anyone from her past. Michael's family embraced her completely. His mother, Linda, would later sob in court testimony, "She was the daughter I never had. She called me Mom. How could this all be a lie?" But there were cracks, tiny ones that Michael either ignored or explained away. Sarah always handled the mail, always filed their taxes, always dealt with any official paperwork. She'd grown anxious whenever they talked about having children, saying she wasn't ready yet. She never wanted to go to medical appointments together, claiming she preferred handling her health privately. When Michael's cousin offered to help with a family genealogy project, Sarah politely declined, saying her records had been lost in a fire. These seemed like quirks of a private person, not red flags of a massive deception. And then there were the phone calls, always brief, always taken in another room. When Michael asked who called, Sarah would say it was work or a wrong number. Sometimes he'd catch her looking distant, almost sad, staring out the window like she was remembering something painful. When he'd ask what was wrong, she'd smile and say she was just tired. Michael would wrap his arms around her and promise that whatever troubled her past, it didn't matter. He loved her exactly as she was. Those words would come back to haunt him in ways he never could have imagined. Because Sarah wasn't just keeping secrets about her past. She was keeping secrets about her very identity, secrets that had been carefully guarded for over a decade. The first crack appeared in their marriage during year 5. Michael had been pushing harder about starting a family, and Sarah's resistance was becoming more obvious. Their conversations about children, once gentle and theoretical, turned into arguments that left both of them frustrated and distant. Sarah would lock herself in the bathroom for long periods, and Michael could hear her crying through the door. When he'd knock and ask to come in, she'd emerge with red eyes and claim she was just overwhelmed with work stress. The fighting intensified when Michael's insurance company required both their medical records for a policy upgrade. Sarah became agitated in a way Michael had never seen before. She snapped at him, accused him of not trusting her, and insisted she could handle her own paperwork. When Michael pointed out that married couples typically handled these things together, Sarah's reaction was explosive. She threw a coffee mug across the kitchen and screamed that some things needed to stay private. That night, she slept in the guest room, and Michael lay awake wondering what could possibly be so terrible in her medical history that she'd rather risk their marriage than share it. The tension began affecting everything. Sarah became jumpy whenever mail arrived, racing to get it before Michael could see. She started working late more often, and when Michael would call her office, sometimes they'd say she'd already left. Small lies began piling up. She'd claim to be at the grocery store, but come home empty-handed. She'd say she was meeting friends for dinner, but Michael knew she didn't really have close friends in town. When he tried to address it, Sarah would either deflect with jokes or become defensive, accusing him of being controlling and paranoid. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in October 2023. Michael had come home early from a job site due to weather and decided to surprise Sarah with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. The house was empty, but he noticed Sarah's purse was still there, along with her car keys. Her phone was charging on the kitchen counter, something she never did during the day. Confused and starting to worry, Michael called her office. The receptionist, sounding confused, told him Sarah had called in sick and wasn't expected back until the next day. Michael stood in their kitchen, holding takeout containers and staring at his wife's phone, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. That evening, when Sarah came home around 8 p.m., she seemed startled to find Michael waiting for her. She claimed she'd been at an urgent care clinic for a migraine, then visiting a friend who was going through a divorce. When Michael asked which friend, Sarah hesitated just long enough for him to notice. She said it was someone from work he wouldn't know. When he mentioned calling her office, Sarah's face went pale, then flushed red. She accused him of checking up on her like she was a child, grabbed her phone, and locked herself in their bedroom. That night, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He waited until Sarah was asleep, then quietly took her purse to the kitchen and began looking through it. He told himself he was just worried about her health, that maybe she was hiding some medical issue she was embarrassed about. What he found instead was a second driver's license, issued in the name Sarah Elena Martinez, with a different birth date than the one he knew. The address was their current home, but the license had been renewed just 2 months ago. Michael stared at the ID, his hands shaking. Why would his wife have 2 licenses? Was Sarah even her real name? Unable to sleep, Michael spent the rest of the night searching through boxes in their garage, looking for any clues about his wife's past. Hidden behind Christmas decorations, he found a small lockbox he'd never seen before. Inside were documents that made his head spin: hospital records, legal forms, and correspondence from a clinic in Jacksonville that specialized in gender-affirming care. The name on every document was Samuel Martinez, and the photos clearly showed his wife, but with shorter hair and different clothing. Michael sat on the garage floor, surrounded by papers that rewrote everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd loved for 7 years. The final piece came when he found a letter dated just 6 months after their wedding. It was from a lawyer advising Samuel that name change documents were ready and that all medical records had been successfully transferred to the new identity. The letter referenced completing your transition and starting fresh with your new life. Michael read it 3 times before the full reality hit him. His wife had been born male and had transitioned before they ever met. Every intimate moment, every future plan they'd made, every time he'd promised to love her no matter what, had been built on what he now saw as a fundamental lie. If you're still watching, drop a comment with Florida so we know who's writing this case out with us. Michael confronted Sarah the next evening when she came home from work. His hands were shaking as he placed the documents on the kitchen table between them. Sarah looked at the papers, then at his face, and Michael later said he watched all the color drain from her cheeks. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah whispered, "How long have you known?" What happened next would be debated in court, dissected by lawyers, and replayed in Michael's mind for the rest of his life. According to his testimony, Sarah didn't deny anything. Instead, she began crying and begging him to understand. She explained that she'd been born Samuel, had begun transitioning in her early 20s, and had moved to Florida to start over after completing her medical transition. She'd never intended to deceive him, she said. By the time she realized she was falling in love, she was terrified that telling the truth would destroy their relationship. Michael's reaction was immediate and devastating. He later described feeling like his entire life had been a lie, like the person he'd loved and married had never existed. In his victim impact statement, he talked about feeling violated in a way he couldn't explain, like every intimate moment they'd shared had been based on deception. He accused Sarah of stealing 7 years of his life, of making him an unwilling participant in what he saw as an elaborate fraud. The argument escalated quickly, with Michael shouting accusations and Sarah sobbing apologies and explanations. Neighbors later testified they could hear the shouting through the walls. Mrs. Patterson next door said she'd never heard the couple fight like that before. The argument seemed to go on for hours, with periods of quieter conversation followed by explosive shouting. Around 10 p.m., Mrs. Patterson called her husband over because she was genuinely concerned for Sarah's safety. They could hear Michael yelling things like, "You made me live a lie," and "I don't even know who you are." Sarah's responses were harder to make out, but they could hear her crying and pleading. What pushed Michael over the edge, according to his confession, was when Sarah admitted that several people had known about her past, including her former employer in Jacksonville and the doctor who'd been managing her hormone therapy. She'd maintained these connections throughout their marriage, using her maiden name and making regular trips to Jacksonville for medical care. Michael realized that while he'd been completely in the dark, there was a whole network of people who knew the truth about his wife's identity. He felt humiliated and betrayed on a level he'd never experienced. The actual shooting happened around 11:30 p.m. Michael had gone to their bedroom and retrieved the handgun he kept in the nightstand for protection. When he returned to the kitchen, Sarah was on the phone, and he could hear her speaking quietly to someone, saying she might need help. In his statement, Michael claimed that hearing her call someone else for support, when she'd never trusted him with the truth, sent him into a rage he couldn't control. He shouted for her to hang up the phone. When she didn't comply immediately, something inside him snapped. The first shot went wide, shattering the kitchen window. Sarah screamed and dropped the phone, begging Michael to stop and think about what he was doing. She tried to run toward the back door, but Michael blocked her path. In the 911 recording from Sarah's dropped phone, you can hear her crying, "Please don't do this, I love you, Michael, please," over and over. The second shot caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into the kitchen cabinets. As she lay bleeding on the floor, reaching toward the back door, Michael stood over her and fired the third shot into her chest. The sound of the gunshot seemed to break Michael out of whatever rage had consumed him. He later described the moment as like waking up from a nightmare. He dropped the gun, fell to his knees beside Sarah's body, and began trying to stop the bleeding with kitchen towels, but it was too late. Sarah died in their kitchen, surrounded by the documents that had exposed her secret, while Michael sobbed and called 911 to report what he'd done. When police arrived 7 minutes later, they found Michael sitting on the floor next to Sarah's body, covered in her blood and repeating, "She lied to me," over and over. He didn't resist arrest, didn't ask for a lawyer, and gave a full confession that night. But even as he sat in the interview room describing his actions, Michael seemed disconnected from the reality of what he'd done. He kept referring to Sarah in the past tense, talking about the person he thought he'd married as if she'd been a fictional character. The real tragedy, investigators realized, was that Sarah had been planning to tell him the truth. They found a draft letter on her computer, dated just 3 days before the murder, where she'd poured her heart out about her past and begged Michael to understand why she'd kept this secret for so long. The crime scene told a story of a marriage destroyed by secrets and fear. Detective Maria Santos, who'd worked hundreds of domestic violence cases, said this one stayed with her because of how preventable it felt. The house was pristine except for the kitchen, where Sarah had died. There were wedding photos on every wall, vacation souvenirs on shelves, evidence of a couple who'd built a life together. But hidden throughout the house, investigators found the documents and evidence of Sarah's double life. Not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she was terrified of losing everything she'd worked so hard to build. The investigation revealed the full scope of Sarah's carefully constructed identity. She'd legally changed her name and gender marker in 2014, 2 years before meeting Michael. Every document she'd shown him from their marriage forward was legitimate. Her social security card, driver's license, even her birth certificate had been legally amended to reflect her identity as Sarah. She'd done everything by the book, following legal procedures to live as her authentic self. The deception wasn't about committing fraud, it was about self-preservation. Detective Santos interviewed Sarah's doctor in Jacksonville, Dr. Rebecca Chen, who'd been treating Sarah for gender dysphoria since 2012. Dr. Chen explained that many transgender people, especially those who transition later in life, struggle with when and how to disclose their history to romantic partners. Sarah had been attending support groups and therapy sessions throughout her marriage, trying to work up the courage to tell Michael the truth. The draft letter found on her computer wasn't the first one she'd written. Police found dozens of unsent emails and deleted documents where Sarah had tried to find the words to explain her past to the man she loved. The community reaction was swift and divided. Michael's family and friends struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the crime he'd committed. His mother, Linda, told reporters she was devastated, but still couldn't understand why Sarah hadn't trusted them with the truth. Michael's brother James was more blunt, saying he felt betrayed on Michael's behalf and couldn't imagine living with that kind of deception. But Sarah's colleagues and friends from her support group painted a different picture. They described a woman who was terrified of rejection, who'd seen too many transgender people lose everything when they disclosed their history. The legal case became a lightning rod for debates about disclosure, deception, and the violence faced by transgender people. Michael's defense team argued that he'd been the victim of fraud, that Sarah's failure to disclose her transgender status constituted a form of sexual deception that had driven him to temporary insanity. They pointed to cases in other states where similar defenses had been used, claiming that Michael's reaction, while tragic, was understandable given the circumstances. The prosecution countered that no deception, real or perceived, justified murder, and that Sarah had every right to privacy about her medical history. The trial preparation revealed just how much planning Sarah had put into eventually telling Michael the truth. Her therapist, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, testified that Sarah had been working toward disclosure for over a year before her death. She'd been researching how to have the conversation, practicing what she'd say, and even considering couples therapy as a way to navigate the revelation together. Sarah had been saving money in a separate account, not to deceive Michael, but to give them both options if he needed time to process the information or if their marriage couldn't survive the truth. The most heartbreaking evidence was Sarah's personal journal, found hidden in her car. For years, She'd been writing about her guilt over the secret she was keeping and her terror of losing Michael if she told him. Entry after entry showed a woman tormented by the choice between living authentically and protecting the life she'd built. 6 months before her death, she'd written, "I love him too much to keep lying, but I love him too much to risk losing him." How do you tell someone their whole marriage has been based on something you weren't ready to share? How do you explain that you're the same person, just with a more complicated history? The investigation also uncovered the broader context of violence against transgender women. Statistics showed that transgender people, particularly transgender women of color, face disproportionate rates of violence and murder. Sarah had been aware of these risks, which partly explained her caution about disclosure. She'd known other transgender women who'd lost partners, jobs, and family relationships after revealing their history. Her fear wasn't irrational. It was based on the very real dangers faced by people in her community. The trial began 8 months after Sarah's death, and from the opening statements, it was clear this case would hinge on questions that went far beyond simple guilt or innocence. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Carmen Rodriguez, argued that this was a straightforward murder case. A man had killed his wife in their home after discovering something about her past that he didn't like. No secret, no matter how significant, justified taking another person's life. The defense, headed by veteran attorney Robert Patterson, painted Michael as a victim of an elaborate deception that had destroyed his ability to trust and react rationally. The testimony from Michael's family and friends revealed the devastating impact Sarah's secret had on more than just their marriage. Michael's mother, Linda, broke down on the witness stand as she described how betrayed she felt. She'd loved Sarah like a daughter, had planned to pass down family heirlooms to her, had imagined grandchildren who would carry on their family traditions. Learning about Sarah's past made her question every holiday dinner, every birthday celebration, every intimate family moment they'd shared. Through tears, she testified that while she didn't condone what Michael had done, she understood his feeling of betrayal. Dr. Rebecca Chen, Sarah's physician, provided crucial testimony about the medical and legal aspects of Sarah's transition. She explained that Sarah had followed all proper procedures, that her transition was medically supervised and legally documented, and that there was nothing fraudulent about her identity as a woman. She also testified about the psychological toll of keeping such a significant secret from a spouse. Many of her transgender patients struggled with disclosure, she explained, because the risks of violence and rejection were very real. Sarah had been working toward telling Michael the truth, but she'd wanted to do it safely and with professional support. The most compelling testimony came from Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, Sarah's therapist, who'd been working with her on the disclosure issue for over a year. She read excerpts from their sessions where Sarah agonized over when and how to tell Michael about her past. Sarah had been terrified that Michael would see her transition as deception rather than understanding it as her journey to live authentically. Dr. Rodriguez testified that Sarah had never intended to keep the secret forever. She just needed time to find the courage and the right approach. Michael's own testimony was devastating to listen to. Soft-spoken and clearly remorseful, he described the moment of discovering Sarah's documents as feeling like his world had collapsed. He talked about feeling like everything he'd believed about his life was a lie, like the woman he'd loved had never actually existed. His testimony revealed a man grappling with his own preconceptions about gender and identity, admitting that he'd never considered how complicated these issues could be. But even while expressing remorse for Sarah's death, he continued to characterize her secrecy as a betrayal that had justified his initial anger, if not his ultimate actions. The prosecution's closing argument focused on the fundamental principle that murder is never justified, regardless of the circumstances that preceded it. Carmen Rodriguez reminded the jury that Sarah had been running toward the back door when Michael fired the final shot, that she'd been begging for her life, that she'd posed no physical threat to him. Whatever Michael felt about Sarah's past, she argued, he had no right to become judge, jury, and executioner. She challenged the jury to consider what kind of precedent they'd set if they accepted the defense's argument that deception could excuse murder. The defense's closing argument was more complex, acknowledging the tragedy while asking the jury to consider Michael's state of mind. Robert Patterson argued that Michael had been living what he genuinely believed to be a fraudulent marriage for 7 years. He wasn't asking the jury to excuse murder, he said, but to understand that Michael's actions came from a place of profound psychological trauma rather than cold-blooded malice. He pointed to expert testimony about the psychological impact of discovered deception in intimate relationships, arguing that Michael's ability to think rationally had been compromised. The jury deliberated for 3 days, and when they returned, the foreman's voice was barely audible as he read the verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Michael's mother crying and the scratch of reporters' pens. Michael himself showed no visible reaction, staring straight ahead, as if he still couldn't fully process what had happened. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison, but her comments during sentencing revealed the complexity of the case that had consumed her courtroom for weeks. Judge Williams acknowledged that this case had forced everyone involved to grapple with difficult questions about identity, disclosure, and the nature of intimate relationships. She spoke directly to Michael, telling him that while she could understand his feelings of betrayal, nothing Sarah had done justified her death. She also spoke about Sarah, describing her as a woman who'd been trying to live authentically while protecting herself and the person she loved. The tragedy, the judge said, was that Sarah had died before she could find the courage to trust Michael with her truth, and Michael had acted before he could find the wisdom to handle that truth with compassion. The most gut-wrenching twist came 3 weeks after Michael's sentencing, when Sarah's belongings were finally released to her chosen family from the transgender support group. Hidden in her jewelry box was an engagement ring and a letter dated just 2 days before her death. The letter was addressed to Michael, and in it, Sarah finally revealed everything she'd been unable to say in life. She wrote about growing up feeling trapped in the wrong body, about years of therapy and medical treatment, about the joy she'd felt when she finally became her authentic self. She wrote about meeting Michael and falling in love so deeply that the thought of losing him terrified her more than living with the secret. The letter revealed that Sarah had planned to tell Michael everything on their upcoming 7th wedding anniversary. She'd made an appointment with Dr. Rodriguez for couples counseling, had prepared all her documents, and had even written out what she wanted to say. She'd hoped that 7 years of love and partnership would be enough foundation to weather the truth. In the letter's most heartbreaking passage, Sarah wrote, "I know I should have told you sooner, but I was so scared of losing you that I nearly lost myself instead. I love you enough to trust you with this now. I hope you love me enough to understand why I waited." Michael was allowed to read the letter in prison, and his reaction was witnessed by his lawyer and a chaplain. He collapsed to the floor, sobbing in a way that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. For the first time since Sarah's death, he seemed to fully understand not just what he'd lost, but what he'd destroyed. The letter revealed that Sarah hadn't been trying to deceive him maliciously. She'd been trying to protect both of them until she found the courage to be completely vulnerable. Michael had killed his wife just days before she planned to trust him with her deepest truth. The case sparked nationwide discussions about transgender rights, intimate partner disclosure, and the violence that too often follows rejection or fear. Sarah's story became part of larger conversations about the dangers faced by transgender women and the importance of education and understanding. Her support group established a foundation in her name to help other transgender people navigate disclosure in relationships safely. They also pushed for better legal protections and resources for people in Sarah's situation. For Michael's family, the revelation brought a different kind of grief. They realized they'd lost Sarah twice, first to Michael's violence, and then to their own inability to understand why she'd felt the need to hide her truth from people who claimed to love her. Linda Thompson, Michael's mother, eventually reached out to Sarah's support group and began attending educational sessions about transgender issues. In a statement released 2 years after the trial, she wrote, "I wish Sarah had trusted us with her truth, but I understand now why she didn't. We failed her by creating a world where she felt safer living in secret than living openly." The case also highlighted the importance of professional support for couples dealing with disclosure issues. Dr. Rodriguez testified that with proper counseling and preparation, these conversations don't have to end in tragedy. Many relationships do survive these revelations, but they require patience, understanding, and often professional help to navigate the complex emotions involved. Sarah's death became a stark reminder of what happens when fear prevents honest communication and when society fails to create safe spaces for people to live authentically. In the end, this tragedy raises questions that don't have easy answers. Do people have an absolute right to privacy about their past, even from intimate partners? Or do intimate relationships require complete transparency to be truly valid? How do we balance the safety of vulnerable people with the expectations of their partners? Where is the line between protecting yourself and deceiving others? These are questions that our legal system, our communities, and our individual consciences continue to wrestle with. Michael Thompson remains in prison, eligible for parole in 2048. In recent interviews, he's expressed genuine remorse for Sarah's death and says he wishes he'd had the chance to understand her truth instead of reacting with violence. He's become an advocate for anger management and domestic violence prevention programs in prison, speaking to other inmates about how rage can destroy everything you claim to love. But no amount of remorse can bring Sarah back or undo the moment when fear and anger overcame love and understanding. Sarah Martinez died at 35, just days before she planned to trust the man she loved with her complete truth. Her story is a reminder that behind every headline about domestic violence is a human being whose life was cut short, whose dreams and hopes and love ended in senseless tragedy. As we grapple with the complex questions this case raises, we must remember that at its core, this is a story about a woman who wanted to be loved for who she truly was, and the devastating consequences when fear prevents that authentic love from flourishing. This case forces us to confront difficult questions about truth, love, and the prices we pay for our deepest fears. Do you think Sarah was wrong to keep her transgender status secret from Michael? Was her fear of rejection understandable, or did Michael have a right to know about her past before they married? Could this tragedy have been prevented if our society was more accepting of transgender people, making it safer for Sarah to be open about her history? And here's the hardest question of all. If you discovered that your spouse had kept a significant secret about their identity for years, how would you react? Would you be able to separate your feelings of betrayal from your love for the person they are today? Or would the revelation that they'd hidden such a fundamental part of themselves make you question everything about your relationship? These aren't just theoretical questions. Somewhere right now, someone is struggling with whether to reveal a difficult truth to someone they love. Someone else is grappling with a discovery that's shattered their understanding of their relationship. How we answer these questions as a society determines whether these situations end in understanding and growth or in tragedy like Sarah's. What are your thoughts? Share them in the comments below, and remember to subscribe so you never miss our deep dives into the cases that challenge everything we think we know about love, trust, and human nature.